1. This particular story occurred about 10 or 11 years ago, so I would have been about 10 at the time. I'm female, 21. I live in a small town in Northern Ireland. Not overly rural, not big city. Think seaside. This story is based around my mum more than me, but I remember everything that occurred, and parts of it, while frightening, are pretty funny. You'll see. At 10, I was in school, obviously, so during the day my mum would walk me there and back, because it was far and she didn't like me walking alone. Well, one of the days she returned home only to see some odd-looking fella lurking around the gate with his car engine still running. The gate itself is hard to open, huge with a metal latch on the top, and he seemed to be having trouble getting in. Halfway through doing this, he looked up furtively and spotted her. She asked him kindly what he was doing, and he said he had a delivery. My mum was like, "Yes, where is it?" And he quickly decided he had the wrong house and hoofed it back to his car. Okay. Mum decided he was odd as hell, but whatever. After this, and during the day while I was at school, my mum kept hearing footsteps on our stones. We have them in our driveway and you can't breathe without them making a sound. Fair enough, however, every time she checked the gate was closed. And there was no one there. Cut to the washing line. Every time the washing went out, Mum noticed something was missing. Mostly our underwear. Literally. She said she'd lose a bra every day, but put it down to my dad's washing dividing skills. Men. Well, one of these weekdays my mum was drying her hair at the front window and heard the gate. Footsteps on the stones. Oh, for fuck. This time the door knocks. Okay, not her imagination, so she waits and listens. Silence. She then checks the window and the gate's closed. She goes to the top of the stairs where you can see the front door, and there's no one there. Now she knows it's not her imagination, so she can only assume whoever it is still creeping around the house. Something at this point makes her frightened. The whole vibe goes wrong, so she calls the police. At this point she's pretty scared, so she's in the bedroom with the door tight shut, waiting for them to arrive when she hears this scream from the back garden. Well, F the hiding. She shoots out the door and down the stairs, whereupon my neighbour is hanging clean out her bathroom window, screaming, "Pervert!" at the aforementioned odd-looking fella, who is unsuccessfully hiding behind a sheet in my garden. He hot-foots it back over the hedge like a bat out of hell, my neighbour still screaming bloody murder. Well, my mum finds this scene more amusing than frightening, and is pissing herself laughing in the kitchen when the police arrive. The whole neighbourhood is congregated outside the front gate of my house to discuss the odd-looking fellow with the police, whereupon my neighbour tells all present that he stalked her for a while and keeps turning up at her work, asking for her phone number, and that is probably her he's after. Okay, well, while they're all in raptures about her, my mum notices across the road a man with a ladder. This man looks familiar. He's also hiding behind said ladder. She calmly points out that the pervy fella is making a getaway behind a stolen ladder. One of the policemen who arrived, who was portly apparently, to say the least, attempts to give chase, but the man promptly drops the ladder and again escapes through back gardens. He had returned to get his car, also stolen, which was parked a few houses up, and which no one had noticed as unusual until now. Well, long story long, in the man's car there was a vast array of stolen belongings, spanning 2 counties, so it wasn't just my neighbour. Among these was a huge amount of underwear belonging to me and my mum, a TV and personal items for our garage, and, oddly, a massive amount of flower pots. When they went to search his house, they also found his garden filled to overflow with stolen gnomes and flower pots of various sizes and abilities. He was convicted of being a thief, and I'm not sure in what capacity, but apparently also being a pervert who was well known for it in his area. What's creepy is that he actually knocked the door, which suggests he was looking for a way in, which suggests probably a bad endgame. Trust your instincts, folks. 2. This happened in 2001 on Halloween. Halloween night, to be specific. I was 7. If you want to know my current age, do the math. My mom helped me remember this one, so if there are further questions I will ask her, as she remembers the night vividly. It was freezing, probably within the 20 to 30 degree range. I was hell-bent on going out anyways. I wanted my pillowcase to be stocked full of sweets, damn it. I was dressed as a cat. Not too hard to imagine that. Now, at the time, I had zero idea, but my rockstar mom was on it, and you can thank her for her on-par memory. My mom noticed a very tall man, dressed in all black. Mom said he had black jeans on, black trench coat, and a black hockey mask. He had no kids with him, so that was a huge red flag to my mom. But he did have a pumpkin basket to put candy in. He followed us around house to house, always stayed back 3 or 4 houses according to Mom. After about 20 or so minutes she shrugged it off, thinking this was some really tall kid just innocently out trick-or-treating. But the more she kept shrugging it off, the more uneasy she felt. Now I do remember my pillowcase was only half full and my mom hurrying us home, and me being super pouty about it. I do not, however, remember Mom putting the house on lockdown after we got in the front door, but she remembers and said she did it very quickly. I ate some candy, brushed my teeth, got into bed. Mom laid down next to me, I remember this, and thought it a little weird since I was sleeping on my own at 7. Now this is where my mom really helped me out with this story, as I had no idea until we talked about it earlier. Fast forward to the morning. There was a pumpkin basket full of candy with a note on top that said, "Meow" in chicken scratch, on our front porch right outside the front door. My mom threw out the candy in case it was tampered with, and she burned up the note. Now what creeps me out, and I just found out from my mom earlier, is that in the middle of the night she got up from my bed to recheck the house, looked out the window and saw him, in our front lawn, staring at the house with the pumpkin basket in his hand. She didn't think he noticed her. She called the police immediately. She briefed the officer on what happened. The officer said he'd do a few rounds and patrol the area. My mom never heard back from the officer that night. Or ever, she said. Mom also told me she stayed up the entire night with a pistol in her lap after seeing him in the front yard. Since that night, and up until right now, nothing weird with him has ever happened since. But as for his intentions, zero idea. 3. In the summer of 2015, I was 33 years old, broke and jobless in Mexico City. My entire life had gone steadily down the drain for the past couple of years, and my best friend had moved back to Europe. I was tired and bored, so when an online friend I had met in person 2 years before invited me to spend a month in his farmhouse in Norway, I accepted without hesitation. The deal was simple. In exchange for some work at the farm, I would get some pretty sweet holidays in a country I always wanted to visit. I have no problem doing labor work, and in fact I was looking forward to it, and get my body back into real action. Since I moved back to Mexico City from Canada in 2011, I had been feeling rusted and soft, so I packed my suitcase, put on my boots and said goodbye to Mexico City the best way I knew how, by getting pissed drunk. I arrived to Stavanger in Norway, but my suitcase decided to go to Thailand instead. After an hour filling the reports and getting the address of my friend's house, I was able to walk out and meet him again. My friend Harold. He was standing there, confused and annoyed. He told me later he was about to leave the airport thinking I had decided not to take the flight after all. I guess I was lucky. That night I spent it with Harold and his friends, in an oceanfront apartment, in a quiet neighborhood in Stavanger, getting drunk in Norwegian beer and smoking hash. Disgusting shit if you ask me, I prefer the real thing. But anyways, I felt welcomed and content. The next day Harold drove me all the way to his farmhouse about an hour south of Stavanger, in a community called Egersund. At least I think that's the name of the place I was in. Norwegian names and addresses are weird if you're not familiar with them. The land Harold owned was huge and beautiful. Not really sure how it all works, but in his property there's a lighthouse that attracts a lot of tourists from all over Europe. The house itself was small, located on top of a hill, with a huge barn next to it. Harold lived alone in the 2-story house, but I was told the basement housed a tenant. As soon as I glanced to the basement window, I got a strange feeling of dread. There was a webcam facing the driveway, and the rest of the window was covered by boxes and papers. But I decided not to mention it since Harold didn't seem to care. I just assumed the guy was an eccentric man, or maybe was just a normal precaution considering we were more or less in the middle of nowhere, with the neighboring houses separated by big fields. I just took my mind out of it and focused on the joy of being in Norway. After being installed in one of the bedrooms upstairs, I was informed that week Harold's son's wedding was going to be celebrated, and thus the house would be filled with the bride's family from Bergen, I think. In general, it was great to meet them, but on my second night when everybody had gone to sleep, and Harold and I were still up chatting and drinking beer, I got to meet the tenant, Olaf. Harold had been having some troubles with his new smartphone, and apparently Olaf was tech-savvy, and had indeed been the one purchasing the phone for Harold. We went downstairs to Olaf's basement. Now Harold kept telling me he didn't like Olaf, and was actually upset by the way Olaf kept the newly remodeled basement. But for what I understood, they had some kind of relationship more than just landlord-tenant. The basement was dark, all the windows covered, and piles of junk cluttered the entire place. The bedroom was full of computer parts and electronic junk. He had blinking and beeping. Olaf invited us to sit down, and when he turned on a desk lamp to check Harold's phone, I got the first real good look at him. He was in his mid-40s but looked older, shaved head, really skinny, big nose and deep shadows under his eyes. He had this entire look of a meth addict. I should know since I worked in a recovery house in Surrey, British Columbia in Canada. I had seen the same face back then in people who were dealing with severe addictions. The way he stuttered only confirmed further my observations, and I decided I had to keep an eye on him. My gut told me right then and there he was trouble. Olaf finished with Harold's phone and then directed his attention to me. He asked me if I wanted to see some porn, to which I declined entirely. I just wanted to leave that dark, oppressive basement. Harold laughed a drunken laughter and asked Olaf if he had gay porn, to which Olaf said he didn't care about the sexuality of the videos. He simply liked to see people getting things introduced to them. When he said that, I got chills running down my spine and asked myself if he meant it in just a sexual way or if there was a more ominous meaning to it. But we didn't stay to find out. Harold had a busy day the next day and I was tired and thoroughly creeped out by him. When we went back in the house, I asked Harold if he trusted his friend, to which Harold answered Olaf wasn't his friend. He was just an addict renting the basement. The government paid Harold the rent, and a nurse visited him once a week to bring him his medication. After dropping that bomb, he said goodnight and went to his bedroom. I tried not to think about Olaf, but between my gut feeling and him popping in the house, unannounced when everyone else was out, preparing for the wedding for that weekend, I couldn't really relax. The first time he went inside was to give me a flash drive with movies he had illegally downloaded from the internet. He made sure to emphasize the illegal part. The second time he seemed high, and wanted simply to let me know if I needed something I could ask him for anything, but asked me not to tell Harold about him going upstairs. He said that and then walked out very slowly and carefully, as if he knew he would fall if he rushed. When the wedding was over and the house was again empty except for Harold and me, the encounters with Olaf became stranger and more often. One time while I was in the kitchen fixing myself some breakfast, I turned around to find Olaf standing in the kitchen door, bleeding from his nose, staring at me. I jumped out of my skin and dropped my breakfast, making a huge mess. But he didn't seem to notice. He simply started babbling incoherently, while directing his cloudy eyes to the ceiling on top of my head. I was petrified, trying to think of a train of actions that wouldn't trigger a violent response from him, when he simply turned around and quietly walked out of the house. I started locking the door whenever I was alone in that house since that day. When I told Harold about all this, he got visibly mad and went downstairs to talk and yell at Olaf. Harold told me he didn't like to have him in his basement, and he had tried to kick him out several times, but the government had always ruled against evicting Olaf, and Harold's sister was mostly responsible for it. She felt bad for the guy and was 100% on Olaf's side, just because he had the same name as her father. Go figure. So Harold had to learn to live with him in his basement, but only because Olaf was supposed to be clean and in treatment for his addiction. After that day, Olaf stopped being friendly with me and just became a cold, invasive presence in my life there. There was one day when I was in the barn chatting with a couple of Harold's friends, when Olaf entered the barn to place his laptop and some homemade-looking gadget by the window. Despite nobody asking him, he began to explain to us he was using it to hack into people's networks to get their Wi-Fi passwords. You know, like everyone does, right? He gave me a nasty glare and then stormed out. I turned to Harold's friends and told them I was completely afraid of him, and I had this feeling that he would attack me one day. Harold's friends told me that would never happen, but if I ever felt I was in real danger, I could give them a call and they would pick me up. We exchanged numbers, hugged, and said goodbye for the night. The next days, things between Harold and me turned sour, mostly because I wasn't feeling safe anymore, and I had expressed my wish to instead go to Germany to visit the man who is now my husband. Apparently, Harold had hoped for us to grow closer, but had failed to let me know. In the end, I was exhausted, and didn't want to deal with any of that anymore. I should mention that Harold has a severe alcoholism I wasn't aware of until that month I spent with him, seeing him get filthy wasted on a daily basis. To some that might be attractive, but not to me. So altogether the situation was bad and I wanted out. I had done my job, I had done nothing wrong, and I wanted to be able to relax away from them both. That night I decided to organize my flight to Germany from Norway. Harold went out to get drunk and didn't come back until the morning the next day. I had tried to stay up and wait for him to talk, but I must have fallen asleep at some point. I woke up to the sound of the front door being closed, and I caught a glance of him walking towards the barn, with the dog and a 6-pack of beers through the living room window. I then tried to send him a message through Facebook, but I discovered the internet was down. That's weird, I thought. In the whole time I had been there, the internet never failed, not even once. I went to the router and restarted it a couple times to no avail. I decided to let it be. Maybe Harold had cut the internet as a way of drunk childish punishment. So I would just get on with my morning routine and have breakfast before going to knock on the barn door. That would give him some time to blow off some steam, I thought. I went downstairs to the bathroom, got comfortably naked, and jumped in the shower ready to refresh myself and sing a couple of songs to lift up my spirit in preparation for the grim talk that awaited me with Harold. Halfway through the first song, I heard a loud bang coming from the door, followed by someone screaming my name. I thought Harold must be pissed, drunk, and angry. I sighed while turning off the shower, thinking I was going to have a long argument, when the bathroom door slammed open, and I saw to my horror Olaf coming at me with a completely deranged expression on his face, wielding a big cutter knife, the kind employees use in warehouses to open boxes. For a few seconds I couldn't think or focus on anything other than the knife in his hand, and the fact that I was naked, wet, and cornered in a small bathroom in the middle of nowhere in Norway. I was paralyzed. My biggest fear was actually happening. I couldn't scream or move. Just stare at the knife he kept pulling and pushing, making that now horrifying noise those blades do when operated. I was about to pass out when Olaf's screams brought me back to the gravity of the situation. He was yelling, accusing me of playing Harold's feelings. He was calling me a liar, a filthy Mexican, and throwing in some threats about cutting me open and fucking me up if I tried to take anything from Harold. That, I think, is what got my gears moving once again. He calling me a thief. I can be called whatever, but I'm not a thief and I'm not a liar. So standing there, getting myself angry at the psycho in front of me, threatening my life, my training from the recovery house in Canada kicked in. I remembered the rules when dealing with altered addicts. Make eye contact, keep your hands down so you don't startle them, speak in a calm but dominant voice. And always refer to them by name. And that's exactly what I did, despite the fear and the certainty of me being stabbed to death. I stared at him in his cloudy, crazy, wide-open eyes and said, "Olaf, you are the thief. You are the one who keeps stealing Harold's silverware, Olaf. You are the one who keeps breaking in his house. Olaf, Harold is not your friend, Olaf. Harold doesn't even want you living here." It was a long shot, but it worked. My words made him confused, and I was able to take one single small step forward, making him take one small step back. He then charged at me again, with his rant and wielding his knife to my chest and neck. I could feel the cold sweat dripping on my back and a burning void forming in my stomach every time he launched the knife forward. But I didn't flinch. I stood my ground and kept repeating the same words to him, every time gaining another step, pushing him little by little out of the bathroom. He might have noticed what I was doing, but by then it was too late. When he took the last step out the bathroom door frame, I moved as fast as my terrorized body would allow me to and slammed the door on his stupid, crooked nose. I locked it immediately and pushed against it with all my body while a storm of curses, punches and kicks rained on that little farmhouse door. I remembered praying to a god I don't really believe in to hold the door in place, to keep that psycho addict outside. There was nothing I could use in that bathroom to defend myself. Nothing against an infuriated high psychopath, wielding a knife and possibly a broken nose. After what it seemed to have been an eternity, I heard and felt a last super strong kick to the door, and then, to my relief, he stormed out of the house, with a loud bang on the front door, announcing his exit. However, I stayed put for another 20 minutes, not able to breathe or think anything else than keeping that door closed. I wanted to puke, but I couldn't move. Eventually my senses came back, and I knew I had to act quickly. I opened the door of the bathroom, flew upstairs, got dressed, and then exited the house through the window to the garden. I knew he could hear me moving on the first floor, and he had his stupid camera spying the driveway. I jumped to the garden, jumped the fence, and ran around the house to the barn. I kicked and banged and screamed for Harold to let me in, but it was useless. The drunk fuck was living his drama, and I needed help. So I ran all the way to the next house where his sister lived. Rang the bell, and when she opened, I explained to her as best I could what had just happened. She didn't speak a word of English, so it was a comical exchange for about 10 minutes, with her expressions shifted from confusion to absolute terror mirroring my own. She walked me up to the barn, opened the door, commanded Harold to guard me, and went straight to the basement to confront Olaf. I was in shock and shaking, still trying to explain to Harold what had just happened. His drunken state was gone by the time I was finished explaining. He too went to the basement, and I could just hear the screams. They took him out. The sister and her husband got Olaf in a car and took him away. Harold stayed with me all day. I drank so much beer, but I simply couldn't get drunk. I wanted to get drunk. I wanted to forget, but I simply couldn't. I was told that Olaf admitted having the knife, and that his intentions were to make me fight him. So in reality, he wanted an excuse to stab the Jesus out of my naked butt. After all, he liked to see people having things introduced in them, right? That night I slept in the house while Harold kept guard on the house. I had some tools with me to defend me, and, of course, I slept fully dressed. A horrible night. The next morning we went to the police to file a report, but even the cops seemed baffled and couldn't believe something like that could ever happen in their small, peaceful, picture-perfect community. But they believed me, and the cop who took my statement asked me if there was somewhere I could go while they sorted out all the mess with Olaf. I told them that I was in fact planning to visit Germany the very next day. That last day I barely spoke with Harold. I didn't blame him. But he told me that in his drunken state, he had told Olaf that I was leaving, and he was sad about it. Since Olaf had been doing drugs all night, he understood he had to defend Harold, so he, Olaf, cut off the internet, waited for me to go in the shower, and went upstairs to do his job. I left Norway without a single word, without looking back. They told me I could testify via Skype whenever the trial started, so they took my information and promised me justice would be served. It's been more than a year now, and I never heard back from the police. When I asked Harold about it, he told me the police dropped the case for lack of evidence, and Olaf is back in Harold's basement doing whatever it is he does. Life goes on. I was angry for a while, but even anger goes away after a while, if there is nothing to burn. I try to focus on the good things of life and life itself. Every day is now a gift or a chance, but the shadow of fear never really left me. I keep looking over my shoulder, keep studying people just in case I have to defend myself. I still have a sense of dread whenever I take a shower, especially at the gym, where I'm more vulnerable. I can't help thinking that anyone else would have ended a bloated corpse in a pool of blood in that shower, unnoticed for hours and hours, until someone had to use that bathroom. If I had done something different, if Olaf hadn't been so high to be intimidated by my words, that bloated corpse would have been me. I still don't know how to get rid of that thought, but I try. All I know is that Olaf is free, and I really, really don't want to meet him again. Hey everyone, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 181. Thank you very much to everyone who allowed me to use their stories in this video. I have no idea what day this video is going up, either Thursday or Friday, but the voice still isn't great. It's getting a bit better. The other problems that haven't exactly gone away, but I'll keep an eye on them and hopefully don't get too bad. But I'm at least able to record again, and that's the main thing. Okay, with that I think I'm going to head off for now, so until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.